This was Bob Lambert in 1985, holding his newborn son. Only then he was Bob Robinson to the mother and child. 2 years later, he suddenly disappeared and left a son to grow up believing his father had gone on the run. Many years after that, Bob Lambert was exposed as a police spy. For his son, whose identity is protected by a court order, the news brought confusion and turmoil.
I always knew I had a biological father out there, and that was kind of a secret I've always lived with. And then to find out who he was and the circumstances around his relationship with my mother, it's kind of still this secret that I have to continue living with now.
For the past 5 years, the Metropolitan Police resisted all attempts to acknowledge his emotional trauma. The force had already forked out millions in compensation to the women who were duped into sexual relationships with undercover police officers using fake identities. They included his mother, identified as Jackie. But the Met kept insisting the son did not have a case until this year they conceded. In a letter to the Sun, the Metropolitan Police finally offered regret. Assistant Commissioner Helen Ball wrote, "I wish to express my unreserved apology for the Met's role in the conduct of Bob Lambert, which, she admits, was based on a fundamental deceit." And went on, "The fact that you did not know the truth of the situation for such a prolonged period can only have made that realization all the more upsetting." The Met also acknowledge that relationship, among others, should not have happened.
They're apologising for me being conceived, and they accept that me not knowing the truth must have caused some hurt, but they don't really want to address their role in that. Someone senior in the Metropolitan Police would have known about my existence and continued to cover it up for so long.
That is astonishing, what you say about apologising for you existing.
Yeah, and that's a confusion that I have to live with, and that's never going to go away. They took it to court to strike this out, that basically they had no case to answer.
They argued you didn't have a case.
Yeah.
They argued that for almost 5 years.
Yeah. And when I was in court watching them argue that, it was astonishing really just to hear them basically say that they had no responsibility for me.
Who knew what at Scotland Yard about Bob Lambert's modus operandi in the 80s has not been revealed. Admittedly, the Met's hands are tied because there's a public inquiry ahead, but the Sun has had none of his questions answered.
The main issue for me is why did they let it go on for so long? Why did they not want to put this right earlier? I'm having to put it right now. I'm having to build a relationship with my father now, which is something I'd always wanted to do. I'd always dreamt of doing, was meeting my father and getting to know him, and that was denied to me.
What's the relationship with your father like now?
Yeah, it's a positive relationship. Yeah, that I'm really pleased that I now have that in my life. But yeah, I do have this underlying feeling that it would have been
you missed out
so much more beneficial to me growing up to have got to know him earlier. Yeah, and I would have forgiven him at any stage. I would have done.
3 decades of undercover policing from the 60s to the 90s, and the son of Bob Lambert is the only child known so far to have been conceived in the midst of covert operations. But the public inquiry set up 6 years ago will finally begin questioning witnesses next month. Bob Lambert's undercover role will come under scrutiny next year, and maybe then his son may find out on whose authority did he become the victim of fundamental deceit.